That would be. She is. Yeah, she might be coming back to school next week. I don't think it's her fear. All right, here we go. Okay, perfect. There we go. It worked. Little problem solving, right? Okay, so here's what we want to do. Today we've got a little bit of like content and stuff to go through, but to begin, I would love to like talk for, unfortunately, not a ton of time because we don't have a ton of time. But what?
Did someone add that, or was that you?
It's someone that. Oh yeah, someone added that. The eyebrows.
That is funny.
Hey, technically he would be happy now rather than angry. He or she would be happy because you break through that and you see. Yeah, maybe. Who knows? Talk a little bit about the This Is Water, David Foster Wallace video, which hopefully you guys enjoy isn't the right word, but
This is always on a volume goes off, and then she just didn't bring it back. It was that was the only part.
But the joke at the beginning about the fish, like.
What like leads into the whole rest of it. It was a minute. Oh, the first minute.
No, he started with a joke where he said, there's this older, wiser fish that is walking, down the street, and there are two younger ones, and they say hi to each other. And the older fish says, "Hey boys, how's the water?" The two younger fish walk on, and they, one of the younger fish turns to the other and says, "What the hell's water?" Like the idea, right? Like that's the whole point of. That's literally the entire. I hate missing class. My daughter had a doctor's appointment, like literally just a hearing appointment, like to check her hearing. But because it was at IU West, they don't allow anyone who's not like connected to that person. Like they need a guardian, but no one else to come in because of like COVID precautions. And so I had to take off the afternoon to take care of my son, like just to hang out with him. That's actually not allowed. Because he'd be a huge distraction. He's way too cute to be in here and you guys not to like all stare at him and just, it's ridiculous. But yeah, so we actually went fishing instead. So it was actually a lot of fun. Yeah, it was. But that is frustrating. I dislike substitute teachers. They're great. But try to make it as easy as possible. And that's part of it. We're wasting time. Oh my gosh, we're wasting time. Okay. Okay, so the joke at the beginning, that joke is supposed to like be the thing that sets the trajectory for the entirety of the talk, because it's about the fish like not realizing that they're in water, and that's the whole point of the commencement speech, right? Is that the things like reality for us is going to be most of the time, 99.9% of the time, the things that are not immediately aware to us. So. Beyond that, what is it that, what stuck out to you about that? So, like, what is one of the, the first quote, right? I saw you guys all email me, but I looked through them just to make sure you guys did them, but didn't read them intensely. Yeah.
I think one of the quotes that stuck out to me most was, I don't remember exactly where it was, but he said, a huge percentage of stuff that I tend to be automatically certain of is, as it turns out, totally wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, because that comes from the idea of like that blind certainty that we understand everything. And like because of that, I find that most of the stuff that I believe is completely and utterly incorrect. Or not incorrect maybe, but just wrong in general. And all that comes from like the whole point of this that commencement speech is to say, you are not the center of the world. If you worship yourself, the worship of the self, then you find that everything that you engage with eats you alive. It's not until you move beyond yourself. David Foster Wallace is he's the dumbest, smartest guy I've ever seen. Like, he gets this picture of reality that is perfect in relation to, like, it's basically what we've been talking about for the last 2 weeks. But then he doesn't take that next step. He says, okay, well, let me ask you, how would David Foster Wallace answer that question of, like, why do I exist? What does he say gets us out of that, like, default mode, right, of the world is wholly and literally, I am at the center of the world? What gets us out of that?
Talking about, like, caring for other people, like, realizing that someone, like, I just remember
Keep going.
Like, I just remember the small example that you gave of when you're on the interstate and then there's a car that flies by. You said they may have a kid, so don't try to cut them off.
Yeah.
But basically, seeing the experience or trying to perceive that someone else is having an experience while you are too.
Yes. Where David Foster Wallace says what gets us out of that default mode is just empathy. It's realizing that there is someone else in this world and the world doesn't revolve around me. That was the whole shopping cart scene, in a car. And he says, like, could that be the case? It is likely, highly likely that that's not the case. That person probably is a jerk. But who cares? All that perspective of, like, taking offense says is, I am what matters. And that's just not healthy. One of the best, this is inside to this, just something that came in fifth period when we were talking about this. One of the best pieces of advice referring to, like, spiritual growth that I've ever received was a year ago. Mr. Trujillo was talking about, I think it was talking about, like, Worldview students missing meetings and, like, just, it was like a frustrating week because I felt like people were wasting my time and stuff. And Mr. Trujillo was like, man, the biggest sign of spiritual growth is when you realize, when you understand, or when you come to a place of not taking offense at anything anyone does. And then he went through a lot more of it, but, like, that's what I think about when I hear David Foster Wallace talk about the, like, ugly, cow, like, those are the words that he used, right? Who just ruins my day and takes up all of my time. Taking offense is ultimately saying, I am at the center of this universe and I am what matters. Spiritual growth is to say, I'm not going to take offense. That's an aside. But the idea is that you care for others. He goes all the way to the edge of the cliff of the human experience, human condition, just doesn't take that next step into the Christian faith. Because what you find is that the Christian faith is a home for all of the things that David Foster Wallace is talking about. Like a thing that actually gives meaning and sense. He always talks about, like, the capital T truth as just being aware. That's like the beginning. That's a lowercase t truth of the Christian worldview. But it invites you into this larger truth that says, that's great and that is true, but there's one more step. What is something outside of yourself, outside of the world, outside of this physical, finite world, that can actually be a good source of meaning that you can draw from that makes all these other things matter? That's what we'll talk about today. Yeah.
Rude for no reason or whatever, sort of in a very minor way, breaking, like, some sort of something. Like, you just expect, like, common respect and decency from other people.
But being rude, like, saying that being rude is just a matter of, like, universal morality removes, like, the day-to-day crap that we go through that annoys us and that we can have reactions to, and to where we can react out of character to people. Like, out of the equation. Because, like, if I'm rude to you and call you a jerk or something because, you missed the Worldview meeting today. Like, oh, Hannah Crane, what a jerk. Like, why would you do that? Well, what's busier than me? And you're like, well, or what's more important than me? And, you're like, well, we give some, justification for it, right? Like, excuse for it. Well, I was actually up till like 2 o'clock last night because our dog was sick, or I was actually up reading last night and I just slept through my alarm. Some sort of like understandable thing. Then like, okay, like that's me putting myself at the center of the universe and not realizing that there are other things that go on in your life. In the same fashion, I think that it could also be that if you were rude to me, it'd be uncharacteristic, but maybe there's something going on in your life. For me to take offense at that would be to ignore that other thing. Is it possible? Is it likely that there's something else going on? Probably not. Like the guy cutting him off in a car, right? But does it really matter? Because at the end of the day, don't take offense and then always seek to understand the other person. I think those are two really important pieces of like spiritual advice, spiritual encouragement that can produce growth. Because then it basically says it doesn't matter like if they're universal moral laws. I mean, it does obviously, but in this instance, right, it doesn't, because either way, if you're having a bad day or if that's just who you are, for me to take offense at something that you do is naturally, I think, to say, I don't need to have my time wasted. I don't need to be, spoken to in that way. It's ultimately saying there is something about me that makes it to where you shouldn't speak that way to me, or you shouldn't be that way to me, or you shouldn't treat me that way. Ultimately, that is turning inward, and it's just self-serving. It's not always that's not always the case, but I think what Wallace says is really kind of true, that it is. Because inevitably, like, what does it hurt you to not take offense to someone who, even if they like yell at you? Yeah. Most of the time, you catch people like in those moments that they're on their like worst day.
Is it wrong to like you realize that it's fine, but you're still slightly frustrated?
That's like a question of the heart. I can't answer that. Okay. I mean, yeah, that's a question of the heart that he can't really answer. Because, like, I can be frustrated and move on really quickly. I can be frustrated and dwell on it. That ultimately is a distinction that only you can know and you can tell. And I don't think it's okay to say that you should never be frustrated about something, because there are certain things like holy indignation or righteous anger that are, that's a biblical idea. But most of the time when we get frustrated about stuff, it's about like petty crap. Yeah. It really doesn't matter, because we only get frustrated because it inconveniences us. Yeah. Or it's a hit to our pride or something. So, yeah, it's not that it's always wrong or always self-centered, but I'd venture to say 99% of the time it usually is. Did you ever hand up? That's all right. Okay. Another part of this that gets to the heart of what we're talking about with purpose is the section when David Foster Wallace says, okay, yes, other, like look to the other. But also, it's awareness of like knowing, like liberal arts education is not teaching you how to think, but it's teaching you what to think. How to choose what to think, right? And he makes this distinction that it's not just about choosing what to think, but it's about choosing really what to love. It's an act of worship, right? And so he talks about the ultimate act. If you worship anything that is in this world, if you worship anything that is physical or anything that is worldly, that's my language, not his, then it will eat you alive. And he gives the example of beauty, right? If you worship your beauty, which ultimately, like we said yesterday, is an act of the worship of the self. If you worship beauty, then you'll die 1,000 times when age starts to show before they actually put you in the ground. There's an interesting thesis in there about like plastic surgery, or maybe even like dieting, like diet fads, which would be really interesting to see, like why people pursue those ultimately. It's because their loves are disordered. That'd be interesting. Or maybe has anyone read the Bonhoeffer reading yet? It's okay. It's okay if you haven't. It's not due until Monday. I'm just saying if you have. That is an idea of like cheap grace. They have a view of cheap grace. That's what causes people to like, not a direct cause, but the implied cause is that's what causes them to get plastic surgery, because they don't see any value in like aging, like the beauty of that. I don't know. Interesting. There's a lot to connect there, but I think that could be implied. That is one of my favorite readings that we do also, Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer's incredible anyways. Anyways, we're going to talk more about that on Monday. If you worship power, you'll always feel weak. If you worship money, you'll always feel poor. If you worship, do you see what I'm saying? If you worship, your intelligence, you'll always feel dumb and like you're not good enough. Whatever it is that you worship, the irony of it is that you always feel the inverse of that thing. That's what it means by it'll eat you alive. In sports, if you always feel like you're the best, you'll never feel like. If you worship your abilities, and you'll never feel like you're good enough, right? Like that type of stuff. That is the heart of worshiping worldly things as opposed to having a proper object of your worship. It's Ecclesiastes. I sought out meaning in toil, and I found that I had none because I would die and give it to the next person. So it's meaningless. It ate Solomon alive in that sense, like worshiping toil, pleasure, money, fame, honor, wisdom, all of those things. And so what we find from getting this from a non-Christian person in David Foster Wallace is that he's giving us this lens through which we can view what we love, what we worship. And it's this, right behind me. This is my thesis. True selfhood, true meaning, true being, personhood. Selfhood, really, remember, is just like knowing who you are. True selfhood, true joy, comes through a primary love of Christ, which rightly orders all other loves. True selfhood comes through a primary love of Christ, which rightly orders all other loves. So this will be, what we're going to talk about here has a different point than what we talked about within Ecclesiastes, but it will feel very similar. We're just trying to put more specific language to it. Worship really is just the highest love and devotion that you have for someone or something is innate to human life. We talked about that yesterday, right? All people worship. 2 days ago. Everyone worships. It's not a matter of do you, it's a matter of what do you worship. And what Wallace says, the fundamental concept that we talked about is that you either worship the self or you worship something outside of you. Hopefully it's clear from the This is Water, commencement speech, and Ecclesiastes that worship of the self leads to self-destruction. So that leaves us looking for meaning, looking for something to love outside of us. David Foster Wallace says people. Great. People will let you down. What's the next step? Maybe, some other thing outside of us. What we will say, and what the Christian worldview offers, is that yes, it's outside of you, but not just outside of you, outside of this world. It's something transcendent. It is this. The pursuit of the transcendent, right? We are giving a name to that transcendent thing. The person of Christ. Because, like we said, remember, with knowledge and purpose, infinite longing needs to be satisfied or fulfilled by something equally as infinite. And what we find is that in this world, that leaves nothing. So it has to be something outside of this world. That Lewis quote, right? If I find in myself these desires which nothing of this world can satisfy, that means that I was meant for some other world. So what we need to do is create a little equation, all right? I'm not a math teacher, so that might not be the right language, so just bear with me. If worship is innate, if man is constantly searching for meaning. Also, have you guys ever heard of Viktor Frankl, Search for Meaning? He's a Jewish guy, survived the Holocaust. One of the best books on this idea. It's really, really good, but it's called Man's Search for Meaning. So if we all worship, we all have something we love. There's no such thing as an atheist, right? If we're all searching for something to give us meaning, then what we've come to discover, really, is that man must find meaning, value, or purpose and purpose in something outside of himself or herself. That is the only answer when you have these two variables in it. If people didn't worship, then we wouldn't have to worry about it, and we would just find that nihilism is a proper way of viewing the world. But we do. If not everyone had this like longing, this searching for something, then we could just say, hey, you could just worship whatever you want. It's not a big deal. It satisfies you. But because those two things we know to be true, and we've expounded on those, what we realize is that the only necessary thing, or the only thing that necessarily and completely satisfies, is something outside of, not just ourselves, but of this finite physical world. Has to be. The question is, what is that thing? That's why Scripture, that's why the Gospels are so important, because they point us to the person of Christ. So, we get this from Ecclesiastes. It implies that the only thing worth finding value in is something outside of myself and this world. And now here's the thing. A person's movement from the world, those material things, to faith is something that transforms us, because it gets us to ask this question of, what do we love? What do we worship? That's the first question when it comes to transformation. So let's go through this. Let's say, we'll just say that these are purpose, worship. Same down here, right? What is it that we worship, or where do we find as our source of meaning or purpose? We start with the things, yeah? This is just another way of explaining the book of Ecclesiastes. So we find that, money, power, wisdom, work, pleasure. Let's make it in like our context. School, or grades. We can say grades. Sports. Drama or music, right? Our friends, family, and yeah. And this list obviously could go on and on and on and on and on and on and on, because the stuff that we encounter in our daily lives, if we find meaning, or if we seek to draw meaning from it, then the irony of this is that these things cease to be of value in our life, because we find that they do not fulfill us completely, and they do not give us that sense of meaning. So when that happens, toss it away. That's what we do with people, right? Like if I find that I'm looking to, like within friends especially, when you go to college, what I have found in my own personal experience and with like the experience of others, is that when you find people to connect with, like at the opening, like the welcome day, if you guys have that, where you have like icebreakers and, pizza parties and stuff like that, you'll connect with people, but then you realize quickly that like they're actually not people who you would connect with. And what? And like that's okay, but then you realize quickly like, ooh, they do nothing for me. And you toss them aside. Then you find other people that you connect with. That was my freshman year. The first week I had like 3 or 4 friends at Hanover, and then I realized quickly that like they didn't do anything for me, and like they weren't like, I didn't want to be friends with them. Toss them to the side and you find other people. It sounds vicious, but that's true. We also do that, I see that a lot here with freshmen with like boyfriend-girlfriend relationships as well. Like, wait, you actually don't make me feel better about myself. Psh, you. Hey, how about we trade? People trade. Like freshman and sophomore year, you just trade who you date all the time. It's very strange. Coming from an outside perspective. It is. Yeah, appreciate that though. No, seriously, thank you for the reminder. I made sure to turn it on. It is about to die, though. I just saw that it has one thing left. So if it dies, we'll deal with it. I'll just yell really loud. Maybe it'll hear me. That's the way mics work, right? You just yell into it? Yeah. So this is just to say the thing becomes where my value, where my meaning, where my purpose comes from. Now, this obviously, as Ecclesiastes told us, is an incorrect and where David Foster Wallace told us. Here's the difficulty, or here's the difference, is that when we bring God into this equation, or we bring primary love of Christ rather than these things into this equation, it actually takes these things. So the order, I don't know if this is right in terms of the order or not, but just go with the picture that I'm trying to offer, is that it's not that we find, but it's got purpose and worship there, so it has to be. That's all right, we'll leave it. We'll actually do this. Sorry. And we find that all of these things do not become the ends, right? The goal, the object in and of themselves, but they become a means to that purpose, worship, ends, which is Christ. So here's what I'll say. Through the proper lens, right? Not of a source of meaning, but a means of gaining meaning, a means of finding that proper source. It changes what we find meaning and purpose in, and ironically, it gives these things even greater meaning. These things become even more valuable to us because we now have a lens through which we can view them, like primary love of Christ, to where they do not become something that we abuse. They do not become something that is mutated for us. They do not become something that people we just toss away, or friends that we toss away, or family that we just refuse to engage with because they told us that we couldn't go out one night or whatever. But it actually becomes something that we have a reason now to engage with. Not because it helps us to feel because it helps us to, because through these things, we now find a proper object or source of our, okay, hold on. Because through these things, we now find a proper object of our longing that helps to give us meaning. It helps to make these things mean more. So this is where, I talked about Gay Bird doing his paper on competition and how, through the Christian worldview and through Christian faith, he actually redefined what competition was, and it helped him to take sports more seriously. That's what we're talking about here. Through this lens of Christ, or through this object, the goal of where we draw meaning from when we find that it is in Jesus, what it does is it makes things like power something that we can pursue, but it's not something that defines who we are. We're getting into identity with that, right? But that's a natural thing when we talk about knowledge, purpose, and identities that are going to blend at certain times. Sports become something now that I want to try even harder at, because I know that if I fail, that does not mean that I have no sense of meaning, purpose, or value. Because my value comes from something else. So now I have the freedom. I am liberated to enjoy life. About Ecclesiastes, the main meaning, the way we gain meaning in life is through enjoying it. Eat, drink, and be merry. But the only way we do that is by acknowledging that these things need to be put in their proper place. That is this. I've got an example of it coming up. So this is just the theological perspective, the philosophical theology, right? We'll go to Scripture in a second. So does this make sense? These things are everything in your life. The difficulty is that sometimes we only view it as, my friendships or my family or school. But this is the way you eat. This is the way that you talk to administration. This is the way that you drive. This is everything that you do is teeming now with this sacred significance. Because now it all becomes a way of loving God through these things. So that's why with Christianity, even food takes on supreme significance. Because it actually reflects something greater. Not me, but the way that what I love, which is God. The way that I approach food does. There's a thesis in there for why fast food destroys your spiritual life. Except for Chick-fil-A because that's Jesus chicken. And it's also like, I don't know if I would, no, Chick-fil-A is fast food. I would still lump it in there, even though, it's Jesus chicken. Sorry. I think that it does. If you're at all interested in that and think that you can connect to your thesis, come talk to me. We can read Wendell Berry together, because Wendell Berry is my man, and he's amazing. Huh? Absolutely I do. Yeah. I'm just like throwing stuff. I'm throwing gems out there. I'm not saying I follow it. Come on. That's too hard. No, I've got kids, so we do McDonald's at least once a week. Happy Meals? That's solid. I don't really eat it, but my kids do. But I think that's an interesting thesis. And that's why it's a thesis, right? You got to argue for it. I think there's something to that. Lifting weights. This is why I talked about beauty, right? And like plastic surgery. I think that there's a thesis in here about how we have disordered loves, right? Or we love the wrong thing. And so we become connected to like diet fads. Essential oils. I mean, seriously. Whatever it is. doTERRA. Yeah. I mean, it's seriously, like these feel really insignificant. But when you see how they connect to what we love, where we gain value and meaning, there's a significant connection between those people are ones who probably, not saying they don't love Jesus, but saying, is it clear that their loves are ordered properly? Or are they like Solomon? They love God, but also I love pleasure a lot. Yeah. Because like it's still possible to do that. It's just a really interesting point. Okay, so any questions about any of that? The possibility of thesis statements are endless, which is why I love teaching this class. And why I love the spring, because then we get to talk about them all. Okay, let me give you this quote, and then I want to have like a little bit of time to discuss it. Oh, we've only got 15 minutes left. Dang it. The nature, was that sarcasm? Okay, good. Good. Someone before said something sarcastically in another class and was like, we don't have a lot of time. And this girl in the back was like, oh, dang. That's rude. That hurts. The nature of any, this is worth writing down, by the way. Any good thing is to be abused. The nature of any good thing is to be abused. Any's fine. It says every in my notes. That's good. The nature of any good thing is to be abused. Here's what I want. Number one, I want you to write down in a sentence, what does this mean? Face value, like that. I'm asking you to do literally what it says. What does this mean? That the nature, right? The mere existence or the reason for existence of any good thing is to be abused, right? And that is meant to be very polarizing, all right? Not because I'm trying to be a shock jock, but because I think this will this will go to show a point that we'll talk about in a second. So the nature of any good thing is to be abused. The existence, the mere existence of anything good means that it will be abused. So what does that mean? It kind of just said what it means, because like the nature of it, right? Like, whatever. Let's move on to the second question really quickly, because I answered my own question. Great teacher here. Just telling you what to think. Do you agree or disagree? I want you to give me two sentences. Yes, bleh. No, bleh. All right? Take like 2 minutes. Do that, because we don't have enough time to get through everything. Okay. All right, what do you guys think? Agree, disagree? Yes.
I disagree.
Okay. Why?
Because I feel like every good thing is meant to be used for like its good and intended purpose, but man's fallen nature is to abuse whatever good thing. So it's not the inherent nature of the good thing to be abused, it's the inherent nature of fallen man to abuse that good thing.
Okay. Yeah. That's good, because you're getting at it is not the thing in and of itself, its nature, that makes it the thing that is meant to be abused, but it's we who in our fallen nature abuse good things. Great. Okay. Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think maybe it's just the wording of it. I word this intentionally to think about like the good thing itself, right? Like, I mean, going back to food, right? I think about food. It's probably not the nature of food to be abused. We abuse it. What's the nature of food? To sustain our bodies, right? Yeah. It's to sustain our bodies. It's to help repair our bodies. That's the main way that our muscles repair each other, right? When we work out, as we eat, to refill nutrients. It's to, let's just say for sustenance. But then where does like joy come into that? Like to enjoying food. But does that mean that you shouldn't eat anything that you don't like? Should you only eat things that taste good? If that's the case, if I love hot dogs, should I eat hot dogs every day?
You're going to be a hot dog.
That's what I tell my kids. But why?
Because just because something, that's not weird, but like just because something's like good to you doesn't mean it's good for you. Like you might like the taste of something, like what it does for like your taste buds, and it like makes you happy or something, but that doesn't mean you need to like binge yourself and eat all of it, because it might not actually like nutritionally be good for you.
Yeah. No, that's okay. Yeah, I agree with you completely. And I would even say that just because something's good to you doesn't mean it's good for you. Extends beyond food into all of these things, right? Every aspect of our life. 100%. That's great. Yeah. What else? Agree or disagree?
I'm in trouble fully comprehending what you're actually saying. I think I disagree. I haven't come to the conclusion of exactly why, but I think that while a good thing could be abused, that doesn't mean that the good thing in itself changes value in any way.
Okay. Okay, so have you guys ever eaten at a Chinese food buffet?
Yeah. Oh my.
Okay. What? Oh, well, yes. Not now, obviously, but at some point in the past, pre-COVID. Chinese food buffet is very good. I love it. It's like one of my favorite things to like do. When I was 24, I went with my wife and another couple to a Chinese food buffet, and the guy and I decided to see how much we could actually eat. It went from very quickly, like lo mein and like the Chinese donuts and crab rangoon, like this tastes delicious, to, in a quick turn of events, feeling like I was on the doorstep of death. Like to where he and I both had to run out of our seats we went into the parking lot for some reason and vomited all of our food back up that we just eaten because we ate so much. Thanksgiving meal, right? Thanksgiving dinner, I think of that as well, where you get so excited about food that you eat so much and then you're like, oh, I feel miserable. So it ceases to be good to you. Or it's that good thing actually, I would argue, might change value for you in that moment, that it no longer is good. Because you have not treated it rightly. Like, that's what I think abuse really is, right? That it's not treating something rightly. That it's not that abuse, like I think of like relationships, right? Where it's abusive, like physical, emotional, whatever. It's abuse is like, it could be even having a girlfriend and then taking advantage of her. Not in like, even in like a sexual way, right? Like rapey and like a sexual assault like way. But taking advantage of her like emotionally. Taking advantage of her if she pays for everything. Girls might be a thesis in there about the same thing with guys. Like if you go on dates with guys just to get a free meal. I don't know. Just spitballing here. But in all seriousness, that is treating something not the way that it's supposed to be treated. So that's why I think that I would stick with the wording of this. Because both of who we are and the good things that we encounter, we actually, when we abuse things and we don't treat them rightly, we turn them into negative things. That's the whole point of David Foster Wallace talking about the thing that you worship. You're actually treating it incorrectly. It's not meant to be worshipped. And when you do, it consumes you. What do you guys think about that? So what this means, right, is that like these good things, they have a way that they're supposed to be treated. They have a proper place. They have a proper, let's just say, order in life. Whether it's family, whether it's food, whether it is whether it's alcohol, whether it is sex, anything. It has a way that it should go, that it's treated. And when we don't treat it rightly, or we don't do that thing rightly, it turns itself and it mutates into something else.
I would be wrong. Because like when I was reading the question, I was thinking it as the nature of any good thing is destined to be abused because of the
That might be the case. Also, I'm thinking about this from a perspective of like contemporarily, like presently, like right now, like post-fall world. Even for Christians, I think that we can do this as well, to where we abuse good things. Again, not treating it rightly, right? Like it could be argued that Christians who are totally against drinking, like teetotalers, right? That might be like not treating it rightly. C.S. Lewis has a really great quote, or a really great like 3 pages in the Four Loves about how whiskey is something that is meant to be like appreciated because it gives pleasure, but only in moderation. You would never give an alcoholic a $1,000 bottle of whiskey because they would not treat it rightly. But you give the connoisseur one because he will take an ounce of it, sip it for the whole night, and enjoy it more. So the irony is that when we treat things rightly, we find we enjoy them more. That's like, gosh, we just don't have time. Spend too much time with a simulcast. That's why like premarital sex is such a really big deal. It's like a big deal. Yes, within Christianity, but also like for me personally. And it's not because like I'm not going to get like slut shamey, so don't worry, like ladies and guys, but mostly it's ladies. That's why I put that. I'm being awkward now. I apologize. That's why like premarital sex is such a big deal for me. Not because like it makes you less than who you are. Like it like devalues you. Like your husband or your wife now, like if you had sex before you met them, will like think less of you. But it's because in that context, it actually increases in significance and meaning and value because you're treating that thing rightly. You're not mutating it into something that it was never meant to be, both in what it is and in its purpose. Sex, I think, is a great example of that. Because, I mean, we've all heard the talk before, and, you know, you have those conversations. This is, for me, a way of, like, reframing that. So, like, a thesis on, you know, purpose and purity culture would be really interesting. Just, again, I'm tossing out gems here. And you guys aren't writing any of this down. Whatever. But does that make sense within the context of this? And again, it's a generalization. It's meant to be to increase conversation and to get to this point. That the nature of good things are to be abused when we put them in their improper place. When they become our source of meaning as opposed to when they become a means to getting to, I said to a lot there, a means of getting to that proper object and source of meaning. Which for us, again, primary loyalty, primary love of Christ. Luke 14:25 through 33. Would you guys write that down? I'm going to skim through it because we don't have time to get to it, to go to it and read it together because, we spent too much time probably talking about other stuff. But the whole idea behind this passage is that humanity exists in a state of disorder and disordered loves. That's why Jesus has to say this. Because a disordered love is to put your family above Christ, above Him. And when He's talking to the disciples, He literally says this, where He says, if he who does not hate your mother, father, brother, wife, husband, sister, son, friends, all of these people who are deeply connected to you, immediate family, then you can't follow me and you can't be my disciple. But what's the way that we usually read that? What does love actually look like in that passage? Love actually looks like hate, right? Because He says, if you do not hate these people. The way that I read that, and the way that C.S. Lewis reads it, is that it's not in the smallness of our love for people where our greatness for our love for God comes. But it's actually that in the greatness of our love for God, that gives us the freedom and the possibility to increase in our greatness of love for people. Lewis says, we ought not love a person, for example, too much in proportion to our love for God. But it is in the smallness of our love for God, not the greatness of our love for man, that constitutes the inordinacy. If God is not in His proper place, if Christ is not in His proper place, then our love for other things is going to be in an improper place as well. Here's another way of saying this. We, as humans, are reduced in our capacity to love things rightly, to treat them rightly, if our love is not primarily pointed towards Christ. Let me say it one more time. We, as humans, are reduced in our capacity to love something, to treat it rightly, if our love is not primarily on Christ. That's the point of purpose. Because, as we'll begin talking about tomorrow, Monday, when that love for things increases above our love for Christ, what we get is this term idolatry. And so we're going to talk about idolatry on Monday. Okay? 30 seconds left. All right, any questions? If you do, please make them quick. That was a bad joke, sorry. Cool. Have a great weekend, guys. I mean, you have to be here tomorrow, but I will not see you until Monday. So have a great weekend, and I look forward to seeing you guys on Monday. Thanks. I will try. I'm going to visit my mom with my kids in northern Kentucky. First time we've seen her since February. But also because my wife is going to do a bunch of stuff for our house. Because kids are chaotic. Yeah. Oh, okay. Now I'm very tired.